Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
All right, team. Welcome back to the podcast.
It's quite a tone.
Well, you know.
It's not your usual jovial tone.
Well, today we're going to have a bit of a moan.
Excellent.
Taking a break from our usual jovial, informative
and positive content.
Today, I just want to say that as bike fitters, we are here to tell you the truth. And sometimes the truth bites.
Insert that soundbite. I want the truth.
The truth. You can't handle the truth. That's basically what this episode's all about. But returning to our usual dulcet tones. Yeah, we have a job as bike fitters, and our job is to help you, help riders make the best decisions for their bike riding. Basically, because we've made all the mistakes. We've done all the bad things already. We've seen the consequences. So we're here to, give people sound advice from our years of making mistakes, so you don't have to. But I think, bike fitting can be difficult, and I think we've come across a few different cases over our time where, the truth hurts. And maybe we're just trying to say that bike fitting is really, really helpful, but sometimes the medicine doesn't taste as good as you want it to be. So I thought we'd take you through a journey, maybe some examples, and discuss some of the things that we've seen and how we got around to finding solutions and so on. Maybe to prepare yourself for some of the things you might experience if you come in for a bike fit. Not to put you off, but, just to put the truth out there. So, where shall we start? Shall we buckle in for this this tale of, I don't know, what is it? Oh, it sounds way too moralising.
Well, I think a good place to start, we were discussing earlier, weren't we? Is like, what is our job?
Bike fit?
Cool, next question.
In the beginning, there was bike fit.
No, but there's more than one way to cut a cake, isn't there? And there's more than one way to do a bike fit.
Yeah, well, let's divide this into two different categories then. So people come in to see us for mainly two different reasons. One, they're in pain and discomfort and they want that resolved. And two, they've want to come and buy a new bike. And they've decided that getting a fit before you buy a bike is a good idea.
I see where this is going. I'm on board.
Yeah. So we're going to concentrate on the fit before you buy process, which already in itself, if you don't know about it, you need to know about it, especially in the modern age. I think we talked about this in our recent podcast series, the 6 Modern Mistakes of Bike Fit. Did we talk about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in an age where adjustable bikes are becoming rarer and rarer, you need to figure out what you need before you buy it. Otherwise, you might buy something, spend a lot of money, thousands of pounds, bikes ain't cheap these days, and you might find out that it's not the right bike for you, or not the right fit. So, a fit before you buy process, where we set you up on an adjustable bike or a jig, where we can replicate an ideal position and then map that onto an appropriate new bike. Seems like a really good idea.
Pretty logical.
Yeah.
Pretty self-explanatory.
There you go.
Then you have information
Yeah.
from which you can make better informed decisions.
Yeah.
What a logical, reasonable and rational way of going about it. However,
humans don't work like that, do they?
no, they are emotional beings that make questionable decisions.
Well, purchasing decisions. I think
Yeah.
pretty much all purchasing decisions have an emotional element to it.
Not mine, mate.
Just because you're
Spreadsheet upon spreadsheet.
Oh, you're a Yorkshireman. You're like an outlier, you know. But Don't tell me you don't succumb to modern day marketing
No,
and
absolutely
advertising.
not. I'm sceptical of everything.
You've got super shoes. I've seen them in your cupboard.
Yeah, they're tools to do a job. Aren't they? I don't go for a jog in my super shoes.
Nah.
They come out maybe once, twice a year.
To be fair, you've probably got a spreadsheet for your super shoes, haven't you?
Exactly. And it's based on logic, reason, and information. Because the super shoes I've bought, I've done research on. The geometry of the shoe, the placement of the plate, all matches up with my mechanics.
How does
No
this?
stone unturned. I'm still slow.
So how does this differ from our average rider? How do they make purchasing decisions? How do they choose a bike?
It's red.
Looks cool.
Shan, how did you buy your Cannondale Super? No, you've got a CAD 13.
CAD 13.
CAD 13.
It was
How do you
cheap.
choose that?
I was like, I got this much money and I need something that's longer than the previous one. And that was basically it.
Oh, nice. There you
That's
go.
pretty logical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As logical as I had the capacity to be logical at that point in time.
But you could have bought an Emonda, a Trek.
Could have, if it was the right price.
Yeah. Is it like? Surely it wasn't just price. Like, there's got to be other factors that go into
yeah.
your decision making.
Let's see.
You didn't buy something off AliExpress.
No. And then hindsight, maybe I should have done.
Because it's well cheap then.
But yeah, like a lot of purchasing decisions are primarily based on emotion, right? You don't buy a Ferrari based on logic and reason, do you?
No, but you know, essentially the Tour de France is one massive marketing campaign, right?
Yeah.
Just to, you know,
This is
Put
why bike brands sponsor World Tour teams.
yeah,
Because the amount of bikes they sell off the back of a race like the Tour
yeah,
is ridiculous.
yeah. So whether or not you kind of know or not, I think most people are subject to all those emotions and kind of buying desires that are attached to kind of objects and what we see and what is part of the sport, essentially. There is always a part of you, however small, that actually wants to be kind of emulating the professionals, or we will have different heroes and people that we look up to, and that's just, you know, being a human and being part of the system of kind of cycling and marketing and so on and so on.
Consumerism.
Consumerism, yeah. I know Ev used to go on about the marketing all the time, didn't he? But yeah, it weren't wrong.
He wasn't wrong.
But sometimes we just don't want to talk about it all the time. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about it because, yeah, we approach bike fitting certainly from a logical and practical perspective. And we encourage our riders to do too. So we give them information from which they can make decisions to help them make better buying decisions. So if you've got your fit coordinates, then you can buy the right bike that fits you.
Easy.
Yeah,
10 out of 10 for common sense.
Yeah.
there you go.
However, the implication of this information sometimes goes awry.
Well,
Sorry, the implementation. Not the implication.
Well, would I be correct in saying that most people come into a fit before you buy session with an idea already of what they want to buy?
Yeah.
There is an ideal.
The amount of times I spend, the amount of times I end up putting a jig in a position to demonstrate what a certain bike feels like. If I had £1 for every time I did that.
Or particularly with the online purchases where
Yeah.
you don't see the bike until it turns up in the box.
What does an air road feel like?
Here we go.
There you go. That's what an air road feels like. You still want one?
Yeah. So the beauty in the process is that we can replicate kind of any bike position and you can test it out and you can ride it. But sometimes what that feels like is quite different from what you want it to feel like. And, what we end up with is a completely different bike altogether. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow, especially if you've been thinking about a particular bike for a while.
So it's an interesting psychological sort of situation. So there's an example I'll use with cars, right? So you see someone, say you're on the King's Road, you see someone pull up in a Lamborghini. Now my response is probably going to be different to a lot of other people's, but the average normal response would be to project what you would look like in the driving seat of that car, right? So you're not looking at that Lamborghini and going, oh, the person that's driving that is really cool, and they must be like super rich or whatever. What you're doing is you're imagining your own self in that person's position in the driving seat. You're projecting yourself into that car, on that bike, whatever it is. That lifestyle, exactly. It's kind of like, lifestyle envy. You watch the tour, you see Poggy doing his thing on his, shiny Colnago. You project yourself into that situation, doing Poggy things on that same bike, but you imagine yourself riding that bike. Whereas the reality is actually very, very different and isn't necessarily what you want to be doing. And it's that sort of psychological displacement, whereas you kind of like almost project yourself into that situation and then convince yourself that in order to be able to do that, you need the thing which will suddenly open all the doors to allow you to do that thing in which you see yourself doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this comes, so there's a book by a chap called Morgan Housel called Psychology of Money. And this is a story that he tells when he was doing valet for a very expensive hotel somewhere in LA. About basically parking really expensive cars. He tells the story way better than I've just told it, but it's a similar kind of principle. And we think as humans that by having the thing, this will automatically open that door to be able to do what we want to do and how we envisage ourselves with that object. It's the same thing with running shoes. You buy a pair of Alpha Flies, you're suddenly going to run a marathon world record. The reality is very different. You've still got to actually do the thing. And it's the same with cycling. It's like X bike will improve my riding, therefore I must have X bike.
Well, I think it's particularly poignant for cycling or any like heavily technology-driven sport.
Tech-heavy sports, golf.
Yeah.
Like, every 5 minutes there's a new set of bats come out. I know they're called clubs.
Bats.
I'm aware they're called clubs, but I like calling them bats. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, every 5 minutes there's the latest and greatest club come out that's going to add 50 yards to your drive, or make you putt straight or kick you out of a bunker or whatever. And in reality, it doesn't. But it's that projection of what this object, this thing can do for you that makes us want it. And cycling is super bad for that.
It's just an inherent part of the sport that your identity is tied in with the machine that you ride.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is the identity, because I think there's also an element of how you believe you're being perceived by other people.
Yeah, wanting to fit in with a certain crowd, a certain tribe, if you like, a certain
massively.
clique.
Cycling has the rules, right?
There's literally a book called The Rules.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre.
So socks have to be a certain height, and sleeves have to be a certain length. How far do you shave? Well, don't know. Is that
depends on what day of the week it is.
We are inherently part of the cycling tribe and the rules, and maybe within different tribes within cycling it's slightly less, but even within different tribes there are different rules and different images. Mountain bikers have a certain look, roadies have a certain look, gravel is deciding what it wants to be, the unruly teenager still growing up within cycling. Triathlon definitely has a look. I would
It's
say.
a strong look.
But yeah, so this is where our job gets kind of interesting, where we kind of walk this line where we are offering kind of very practical advice. I don't know, I've never been like a car dealer, but maybe it feels like being a car dealer sometimes. Like people want a certain like kind of thing, and so you kind of want to sell them that thing. You want to enable their hopes, dreams, and ambitions. But at some point, we need to kind of ground ourselves in the practical nature of like, well, these are your body proportions, and this is your functionality, and this is how tall you are, and this is your budget, and so, you know, this is where we can get to, and that might not match the ideal.
Fortunately for car dealers, they're not going to get an email back being like, my back hurts.
But that's the thing. It's like the car, you know, is more forgiving, I would say, because there is
Just a little bit.
well if you think about it, like there's way less human input for it to go, whereas a bike doesn't go anywhere unless there's input.
Yeah.
You know, so a bike is essentially an inanimate object until there is human interaction with it. Whereas, you know, cars are self-driving now.
Yeah.
So,
And this is like the job of, or part of the job of being a bike fitter, is to make people aware of that.
yeah.
They can do what they want with their own money.
Yeah, but it's a, you know, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. And this is where the rubber meets the road of kind of optimal versus practical, or emotional versus logical, in like what you were saying, is like what might be the better tool for the job, whatever that tool is and whatever that job is, might not meet the ideal that rider has in their head of how they perceive themselves and how they want others to perceive them when they're riding their bike.
I don't know, I think we sit in an interesting place as bike fitters, and certainly from our perspective and how we go about it and our philosophy towards it is that we're always trying to help people and enable people and to get them as close to where they want to go as possible, but at the same time, you know, try and give them the most useful information possible.
Yeah.
Like we had some interesting, I'll give a few different examples. Like lately we had a chap in, funnily enough we talked about golf during that session, and his mate who was in the session was like, oh, I should really get my golf clubs fitted now during the bike fit, because he could see what was going to happen. But this lad bought a time trial bike, his first time trial bike, was doing triathlon, his first Ironman. He, you know, just bought the bike off Facebook Marketplace, no idea if it fits. Got the bike now, should probably get it fitted. And luckily it was kind of close to where he needed to be in terms of position. Like we could make it work. But
After muchos wrestling with the aero bars.
yeah, there's a lot of time trial surgery going on to that bike to make it work. But we got to a position where he could ride it, he could potentially sustain it, and he just now has to put in the work to make it happen. And it's going to be a lot of work to make it work. But you know, that was a significant investment for him. And you know, there's always an investment into your sport and an event that you're going to do, and so on. And also, you don't know what you don't know. But he could have done better if he had got the bike fit first, and we would probably have been able to sit down with him and advised him what kind of second-hand bikes would have worked better for him. Because essentially the front end was pretty unadjustable and maxed out as high as it could go, and what you really needed was probably a little bit more height at the front end. He might be able to get away with it if he just works really hard on his mobility and strength to be able to hold the position, but I reckon he might have just enjoyed his. He might enjoy his training and racing a little bit better if he had a different bike. But you don't know what you don't know, and so you have to go on that journey to figure things out. And I guess in some ways it's a little bit unsatisfying for us because we feel he could have been on a better bike, but at the same time, this is enabling him to get on with his triathlon ambitions and see where he goes. But we had to leave him with this is where you are, and this is what you need to do. Off you go, try it out, see what happens, give us feedback, and then from there, you can still make decisions after it, because all your decisions are based on kind of your past experiences. So hopefully it's good enough that he can enjoy it and he stays in the sport. But maybe there's also it's too much for some people to commit to a particular position, and they realize how much work they have to do to actually sustain the position. So yeah, this is the interesting kind of dilemma I guess we have as bike fitters. How much do we enable people to do what they want to do with the equipment that they have, but at the same time give them the knowledge of where they're actually at and what other possibilities there are out there.
But I feel that to me is that's kind of fine, because you don't know what you don't know. When you know
okay.
and you still make a bad decision,
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
that's different.
So it's like you were talking about a guy who knew about the benefits of bike fit and potentially was even booked in for an appointment for a fit before you buy, and still went and bought the bike.
Yes.
Before doing the appointment.
Yes.
And I've chatted to people who have done a similar thing. And I don't know whether that's a failure on the bike fit side, or is that a win for the marketing and sort of scarcity mindset?
That's a win
side
for
of
scarce. That's a win for marketing and creating scarcity,
Yes.
and creating an impulse that I can't wait. I have to have this
Particularly when
thing
there's
now.
a sale on.
Exactly. Yeah. And that to me is the worst part, because then, well, actually he didn't know what he didn't know. You might be able to get away with it. The worst part is when you've gone through this process and you have a position that you've agreed upon between rider and fitter, and then they still go and do something different. Having gone through the process, having this knowledge and information, and the emotion is still so strong that they're willing to park any slither of logic and reason that they've got and go and make an emotional purchase. That to me is mind-blowing, because these things are not cheap. And part of the whole reason why Fit Before You Buy exists is that so you can test a position before you go and invest in a bike that allows you to achieve that position.
But it's not our job to.
No, it's not our job to do. It's not our job to make people to do it. But it just blows my mind, because it's not how I think about things. And I know that everyone's different and all this kind of stuff. But it's you've invested the time and the financial resources in coming and doing a bike fit to explore your position and see where you could possibly get to, and then you just go and do something different.
But I guess that's the boundary of well, this is my ideal position. It doesn't quite fit the kind of bike that I want. So, I'm going to prioritize what I want, and I'm going to buy that bike that I want.
Which is totally fine, but just don't come crying to me when it doesn't work.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're there as the kind of the buffer afterwards of this is why we decided on a different position, and then you decided to kind of buy a bike. It looks really cool. Maybe your mates thinks it looks really cool too.
When you're looking at it at the calf.
Yeah. But it's putting you back in a lot of discomfort. So, what are you going to do? Well, the decision's there. You've got the bike now. Your back's in chaos. because there's more stress on it than you can possibly deal with right now. So what's the solution? Well, you got to improve the mobility, improve the strength, improve your body,
or bin the bike and get one that fits.
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking about this as you were talking earlier. Is where does our responsibility stop as bike fitters? What is our job, and where does our responsibility stop?
Well, I think first and foremost is to open the doors to that conversation, and to be able to have those conversations with people and ask them questions and get them ultimately to make the decisions, because we're not buying the bikes at the end of the day. They're parting with their hard-earned money and their cash.
Debatable.
Their cycle scheme voucher.
Exactly. Thank you.
And everyone's a responsible adult.
Well, I think potentially where our responsibility does end is when they make that decision, and particularly so if it's a decision that hasn't been agreed upon in session / subsequently. That is when you have to let go of some of that responsibility, I think.
The waters are murky there.
Yeah, there's always, we're constantly asking for feedback, and the conversation continues. But I guess it's part of our, certainly our philosophy is one of education.
Yeah.
We want people to learn, we want people to kind of understand, and sometimes it's a hard lesson that creates the education.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be a dialogue beyond that point, but
and to take my facetious hat off for 1 minute, then it is super important to have that dialogue, because if we don't get feedback, we don't know if it's worked or not. If we don't hear anything, we just have to assume that it's all good. So that dialogue, that feedback, that ongoing conversation is really important, because then selfishly it informs us as to whether we're doing a good job or not. And if we don't know, then we can't make changes. So it is important, but
if someone hasn't followed your advice,
exactly, then it's kind of
it's not valuable feedback.
Well, then it's a case of then you could beg the questions have we failed in our education of that particular rider, and where does that responsibility start and stop? Because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't sometimes make it drink. And it's that kind of do we need to think about our process, how we go about things, how we're having these conversations, how we're conveying the information, and what has led that individual to go a different way than what we've tried to sort of impart in that session. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's kind of more of it's like a fundamental of kind of the way we do things, really. It's just it is a two-way street, it is a dialogue. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we can't be the safety net all the time. You have to take responsibility for your own decisions, and we'll help as much as possible, but ultimately it's your call when you choose to part with that cash.
Then again, how many riders can you think of that have come back to us after a Fit Before You Buy session and been bitterly disappointed with the recommendations that we've given?
It's super rare. You want names?
I can't really think of
there's been one that I've had where I think it was a bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Where it wasn't communicated maybe as clearly as it could have been at the start about what that particular rider really, really wanted from their bike. And I think it was a failure in communication both ways. They weren't clear in terms of, they were after a very, very particular aesthetic to their bike. And then maybe on my part, I basically did my very practical, logical and reasonable thing of the bike is a tool to do a job. This is the tool you need.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a bit of a loss in translation a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's the only time I can really think of it happening. Because there's usually enough of a dialogue that goes on before the purchase is made, whereby things get, like the I's get dotted and the T's get crossed. And sometimes it's not until we get into this post-fit dialogue that it really becomes apparent about what is important to that rider. When they see the type of bike that you're recommending and they go, oh, well, this isn't not quite what I had in mind. This is more of what I wanted. And then you kind of pivot and there's usually a bike that works both positionally and aesthetically. And then it's happy days.
Yeah, quite often it's not until you get into different options or dig into the certain decisions that have to be made through the fit that you really get into what they want. Where people kind of think about, well, actually, I kind of want a gravel bike because, you know, I'm going to be doing most of my riding off-road, and actually, I'm going to be carrying quite a lot of stuff. So, you know, maybe wider bars make more sense, and I need 47mm tires, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so part of the process is to get people to think about this. So, you know, open the dialogue so that they are asked questions and can answer the questions themselves. And so that requires honesty with oneself as well as with, you know, the bike rider.
But I think being honest with your bike fitter as well, and just be like, look, if you're driven by certain things like aesthetics or certain styles of bike, being straight and upfront about that is usually a good thing, because then you can test that position and then make a decision as to whether you actually want to go down that route or not. So it's like, you want a tarmac? This is what a tarmac feels like. Do you still want it? Yes or no? Then it's up to you.
I mean, I've got an interesting upcoming fit with someone for a tarmac who has had their bike painted already. So
already? Interesting. That would imply that they've already selected a frame size.
They have.
Interesting.
And
it's a courageous decision.
It's going to be the right size. And
I
so
see a hover bar in this person's future.
So we're going to have to figure out, there's always a way of making it work and showing that person, well, this is what needs to happen.
This is another thing that gets my goat, right? Oh, just you're a bike fitter. Just do some magic. Just make it work. What? You want to take a square peg and put it in this round hole?
I mean, there's always limits, but you know, I guess
that bugs me.
Harry Potter, right?
Harry Potter, yeah. Welcome to Hogwarts. Put your bike on the roller.
Wave a magic wand.
Yeah, exactly.
Hamstrings.
Shazam.
Well, the body is fully adjustable, isn't it? So
theoretically.
Quite often it's not the bike that needs adjusting.
No,
it's just a little bit of magic with some body work. A little bit of pokery and jiggery here.
Some bit of keyhole surgery. Hips fixed.
Magnets and a hacksaw. But it's like, I don't know. People sometimes make strange decisions.
Yeah, and I guess that our message today is just bringing your awareness to, you know, why you're making certain decisions, or kind of, I don't know wrong or right decisions. It's just being honest with yourself as to kind of why you're making particular decisions.
And then sitting with the consequences of your decisions.
Like
whether they may be positive or not as you would have hoped.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely bought frames in the past just because I thought they looked cool, and then realised they were...
You rode an Arione.
I'd say that's a more valid reason to buy a frame than saying that...
Yeah, but if you own it, fine. Totally. Yeah. Why have you bought this? Because I think it's cool. Wicked. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
As long as you're honest about that.
Exactly. Own it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'd send it back.
You would now.
Yeah.
10 years ago, you'd have tried to ride it.
Yeah, I did. Put it all together, and it was like, oh, this is
Yeah, we've all had bikes we've regretted.
for sure. I guess it just matters more now, I think, in this kind of modern age, that you have the opportunity to try before you buy. So if you come in for a session, then you can try everything. So put you on the jig, try different saddles, different cranks, different pedals, different handlebars, different positions. Everything is there to try. And why wouldn't you try before you buy? It's only because of your impulsive nature that you would do that. I guess we got away with it in the past, certainly when I was growing up, because we had more adjustable bikes. But we live in the era of integrated bikes and unadjustable bikes, or certainly it's very expensive to adjust bikes. And you're still left with the same dilemma. So where do I adjust that bike to? Whereas before you could swap out handlebars, stems, seat posts, saddles, all very easily.
I didn't know anyone that didn't have a box of stems.
Yeah, that's true. Which I think we discussed early on in the year. Could this be the golden age of bike fitting? Because everything is so unadjustable, it makes total sense to do a bike fit before. At the same time, I think the other half of this conversation is that as bike fitters, we also need to be practical. So, sometimes where the argument against using a bike fit jig is that it's not a real bike. Like it's a little bit too removed from reality. It doesn't look like a bike, which is good and bad. I quite like it because it removes people's perceptions of what a bike should look like. It's like your guy, Matt, came in at the weekend, took one look at your bike and said, oh, that's a long stem on it. That must be really painful on your back. It's like, no, I just have a very long body. And I need the long stem, otherwise I'll be in pain.
This is after 4 hours of bike fitting.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
Well, you can...
Well, you don't know what you don't listen for.
Yeah. I mean, bike fitting's hard for a rider too, because, you're pedaling and you're having to learn and think all at the same time. I mean, yeah. It's requiring, a bit more effort than usual.
Well, I think you are right in the fact that we do have to have an element of practicality about it, and the fact that bikes are certain shapes and they are how they are, and they are limited in their adjustability. It's that question of, do you fit the rider to the bike or the bike to the rider? And, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but you have to kind of, at the end of the day, you are there to serve that client and that rider.
You have to be realistic.
Exactly.
It's like when we were doing some training on time trial positions earlier.
Yeah.
And I can look at it on a jig and sort of think, well, is this actually realistic in terms of how the position might feel good in space, but is this realistic in terms of how translatable that is onto any time trial bike on the planet?
And what is that bike going to feel like in the real world?
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber really meets the road. And I think I know where you're going with this. But yeah, we do have to have an element of practicality to it. And yeah, it's like what might be quote unquote ideal may not be practical or even achievable on a bike in the real world. And this is where the jig becomes then a tool that the fitter has to know where that position is kind of roughly in space and what that translates to on a bike. Because you could achieve something that feels great on a rig, but then the only option to get that position on a bicycle would be to go custom. And for the vast majority of people, custom isn't really necessary in my view, because there's such a range of bike shapes and bike geometries that there's usually something out there that's stock with a few changes to contact points that can work really well. So knowing how the tool works, i.e. the jig, and what that is going to create on a physical bicycle is part of the skill of being a bike fitter in the real world in 2025, where bikes are how they are.
Yeah, for sure. And that's an interesting, leads us to an interesting point of, how relevant is a custom bike? How do you know when you really need a custom bike? I think I'd probably say that most people who need a custom bike already know
They know.
They need a custom bike. Yeah. They fall so far out of that kind of bell curve that, they know that something special has to be made. I had one memorable kind of custom fit where this guy just had the longest femurs and the longest body in the world, and he needed a 71.5 degree seat tube angle, and you're always a little bit hesitant when you come out with that number. Who was it? I think it was, in the end, it was like a Whitson titanium bike. It was relatively cheap, kind of.
Relatively.
Well, I think, an affordable, titanium custom build.
Yeah.
Oh, the old police out in force today. Wimbledon, man.
South Wimbledon, mate.
Hotbed of crime.
We're at the bottom of the hill.
Oh. Anyway, but back to the custom bikes. He had never been able to find a bike that just fitted well and felt right. But as soon as he sat on this, he was like, this is why it feels good. Because he could finally get his legs into the right place, but still reach the controls and everything like that, and could stay stable in the saddle. But those are rare cases. I think most people who kind of order custom bikes kind of want them for a particular aesthetic.
Or they want to go through the process of
Yeah.
getting a custom bike, yeah. Although having said that, all the bikes we did for the last round of the ultra distance scholarship,
Yeah.
100% needed custom bikes.
All needed custom bikes,
Yeah.
Taylor somehow manages to find riders who really do need custom
And you look
bikes.
at them on CAD and
Yeah.
you go, man, these look janky.
Yeah.
And then you actually see the rider on them and it's like, oh, this makes total sense.
Yeah.
And there's been a few, and you're always kind of like, it's I don't know, for me it's always like a difficult conversation to broach. And like some people know they need custom, but others don't. And it's like, well, there's not really that much out there without going custom that will fit you really well.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult kind of conversation to have. However, these people are relatively few and far between. And like you said, they do sit towards the edges of the bell curve.
Yeah.
And yeah, like custom bikes can be super rewarding, but sometimes aren't necessary.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Yeah. I love designing bikes. It's good fun.
Well, it's stressful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's stressful.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, it's like, as fitters, it's like knowing when to have that conversation, when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And is that the best solution for that rider?
We should get some custom builders back on, talk to them about it.
Yeah, like what geometries are they, what frame shapes are they welding together?
And how deep do they go into this discussion with their clients?
Do they care?
Do clients want us? Because there's three key elements to a custom bike. It's like position, so your bike fit, handling, and adjustability. So how adjustable do you want your bike to be? Like, does it have longevity? So we talked in a previous podcast about designing a bike with a negative 17 degree, stem for the current now. So it looks cool, rides well, but in the future you can just kind of change the stem angle to a less negative angle to bring the front end up.
Without having to change the
Without
fork.
having to change the fork, yeah. So, those little considerations. And how far do kind of frame builders talk to their customers about, say, things like a fork choice, trail figure, head tube angle, all that kind of stuff, in relation to their fit, where the weight distribution of the rider is going to be, relative to the choices that you make around the handling characteristics of that bike. How long do your chainstays need to be, not just to accommodate a certain tire, but how you want the bike to feel, where that weight distribution needs to be. that's something I don't think we've really kind of got into on this podcast yet, but yeah, we should talk to, if any frame builders out there, like, love to talk to you. It'll be great.
Maybe this is one for Tony.
Yeah, we'll definitely get Tony onto the podcast again, Tony Cork, because he loves talking a bit of bike design.
I remember the last time we did this, we schlepped across to Bath,
Yeah.
and within one sentence,
It was quite triggering, wasn't it?
it was off.
He was off, yeah. But yeah, is there where is the space for custom bikes these days? And it's quite, I think it's the Bespoke custom bike show this weekend.
This weekend, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, sadly we can't go, but
Why
yeah.
can't we go?
Well, we're working.
Sad.
Yeah, I know.
Sad face. But
sadly.
yeah, but like, going back to the original point is like, when is it appropriate to have that conversation? And do you actually need it? And what are the considerations around making that decision?
Because when you get a custom bike, you can have anything you want.
So you better make a good choice.
You know what the most popular bike is we currently have a studio at a bike shop, a wonderful bike shop called Bespoke Cycling. And the most common bike we see in there is a Tarmac SLA. But
Probably in a 58.
but probably every single SLA that goes out of that shop, I think they sell probably the most SLAs in the country, but almost every single one is custom painted.
They're all
some
different,
kind
aren't
of-
they?
Yeah. So custom has different levels too. So are we talking about custom in terms of, just designing an entire geometry and bike frame around a particular fit, or are we just talking about customization as in just kind of paint and color? And all of that, it's all relevant. It's all part of creating that identity that you want as a bike rider and where you fit into the tribe of cycling. And there's a very good reason why the SLA is probably the most common bike we see out around the park these days.
So given the choice, would you have a stock bike or a custom bike?
I can ride a stock bike just fine, so I don't feel the need for a custom bike. However, I do have a custom bike. I have a custom bike. So, I have a friend who is a frame builder, and I got him to build a frame for me because I wanted a specific thing. And it's wonderful. I love that bike. It's great.
Surely everyone would have a custom bike given the choice.
I don't know.
Wow. Surely.
But at the same
It's like the
time,
Well,
But custom bikes, like,
One
Yeah.
of one.
but there's inherent problems with that as well, potentially, in the fact that it is one of one, and the chances of you moving that bike on.
But there in itself, you hit the nail on the head. One of one. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Why is
It's
one
cool,
of one?
isn't it?
Well, there you go. So there is
Cool, and
there is a certain
Bespoke
value. There's a certain value in one of one, but there's a social value, not an actual
Sure.
value.
oh yeah.
And so would you pay more for that one of one?
I was talking strictly money is no object terms here.
Well, actually, flip that on its head. Sometimes a custom bike can actually cost less than a stock off the shelf.
Yeah. Well, that's a mad thing, isn't it?
Which is the mad thing. Like, ridiculous. Like, you get something that's unique to you, and it costs less than an off-the-shelf bike.
Well, it's the same with wheels as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get custom built wheels, and they usually perform.
But this is
better.
where the marketing is so strong, that there is such a pull to that particular product, whatever it is, that the blinkers are on and you don't see the wood for the trees, and it's just, right, I have to have that thing. Whereas there could be something else out there that is unique to you, whereby it could be more appropriate, cheaper, and have more longevity.
But this is where I like fit before you buy gets really exciting. When you go through the process, you bind some numbers, and you can just plop it into some databases and have a look around, and then you can start talking about different bikes and like, oh, this is really cool. Or you drag up from your memory, like, oh, what about this bike? This would be really cool.
Drag up from your memory.
The depths of my dark memories.
I saw this on Geometry Geeks once. But do we think it's cool because we're in it and we get nerdy about trail figures and
Yeah, I like
what
bikes.
different forks do to geometries and things
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that?
Like
Do people care enough?
Well, it's like so this is where the skill of being a fitter comes into it, of figuring out what people want, is understanding like what they want and how far they'll go. Like if I talk to someone about trail figure who has no idea what I'm talking about, the eyes are going to glaze over and they're not going to care. You have a really interesting project at the moment where someone's wanting a flat bar and a drop bar road bike at the same time.
Yeah, which is wicked, and I'm well excited about.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
What a project! It's
yeah.
cool, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of drawing.
Yeah. So that is going to be it's not going to be a custom bike, as in someone's going to design a particular geometry from kind of scratch, but it's going to be a custom build in terms of, selecting a frame, selecting the appropriate components. But the brief is unique. And I'm not sure. I can't remember what the idea behind like having both these two, but like a flat bar and a drop bar at the same time is. But it's an interesting project.
Yeah, it's just like a space saver, 2 bikes in one.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I understand it.
Right.
But yeah, why not?
Why not?
Why not?
And it's a single speed.
Yeah,
So
it's a very, very specific.
brief. Yeah.
Yeah, it can't have an eccentric bottom bracket.
So yeah, this is what we get excited about when it comes to kind of like bike riding and bikes and custom bikes and so on. So, if you're interested, come in for a Fit Before You Buy session and we can get all geeky about it if you want to, or we can just tell you what's going to work for you and what's not, and walk you through the process. But we're an open conversation. We want to help you out. And starting with this process first, rather than just guessing at what a bike will be, or if a bike's going to fit you or not, better find out.
I think ultimately, like, we're not here to, as much as we, wear our facetious hats every now and again and are pretty cynical about most things bike industry related. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're just here to kind of hold up the mirror and show you different ways of doing things. And ultimately it is a dialogue and it is a conversation. And we're very much of the view that the decision is yours. And that is empowering, but it also comes with a depth of responsibility.
Mate, you sound like something off Family Fortunes or something. The decision is... No, was it Blind Date? At the end of Blind Date, it's like, the decision is yours.
Mate, do I sound like Cilla Black? Are you having a laugh?
I think we're getting to the hour point of this podcast.
I was trying to round it off with something vaguely informative. And then you go and drop that. I think we'd knock it on the head there then.
Yeah.
Do you want to press the button?
Matt's too young for Scylla.
Oh, I remember Scylla.
He's not as young as he looks.
Come on.
I think we should
Knock it on the
cut
head
the cord while we're before we get ourselves into too much more trouble.
All right. Ta-ra, everyone.
If you made it to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, do leave us a rating or review, as this really helps other riders find our podcast too, and motivates us to keep making more episodes. Thanks for your support, and catch you on the next one.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.